Okay, I think we're recording. This is a recording from when we left off. What was the last day we were at school before the ice apocalypse? So it is Thursday. We were out of school Wednesday. And so Tuesday. Tuesday was the last time I read to you in class. And I don't have the page number because I'm reading out of my own book. So I don't know the page number. But we're in part 2, and this is starting chapter 4 in part 2, chapter 4, part 2, and chapter 5. That's what this reading is going to be. Again, I don't know what page that is in your book, and like you have your book at home anyway, and like you're going to read your book. So just follow along and listen. We left off, Julia and Winston had met again, and she's drawing a map of where they're going to meet in the dirt and for the next time. And that's where we left off. So, part 2, chapters 4 and 5. Okay. Winston looked around the shabby little room above Mr. Charrington's shop. Now, you know I can't go more than a sentence without talking. Mr. Charrington owns the junk shop, and Winston has gone in there a few times. The last time he was in there, I think he got like a conch shell or something from far away, and it brought back memories for him and comfort. So Mr. Charrington is a junk shop owner, and he's over in wherever the Proles live, where I would live. All right, Winston looked around the shabby little room above Mr. Charrington's shop. Beside the window, the enormous bed was made up, with ragged blankets and a coverless bolster. The old-fashioned clock with the 12-hour face was ticking away on the mantelpiece. Remember, they used 24-hour clocks, so a 12-hour clock would have been like an antique. In the corner, on the gate-leg table, the glass paperweight, which he had bought on his last visit, gleamed softly out of the half-darkness. In the fender was a battered tin oil stove, a saucepan, and 2 cups, provided by Mr. Charrington. Winston lit the burner and set a pan of water to boil. He had brought an envelope full of victory coffee and some saccharin tablets. The clock's hands said 7:20. It was 19:20, really. She was coming at 19:30. Folly, folly, his heart kept saying, conscious, gratuitous, suicidal folly, which means recklessness, craziness. Of all the crimes that a party member could commit, this one was the least possible to conceal. Actually, the idea had first floated into his head in the form of a vision of the glass paperweight mirrored by the surface of the gate-leg table. As he had foreseen, Mr. Charrington had made no difficulty about letting the room, which means renting. He was obviously glad of the few dollars that it would bring him, nor did he seem shocked or become offensively, knowing when it was made clear that Winston wanted the room for the purpose of a love affair. Instead, he looked into the middle distance and spoke in generalities with so delicate an air as to give the impression that he had become partly invisible. Privacy, he said, was a very valuable thing. Everyone wanted a place where they could be alone occasionally. Excuse me. And when they had such a place, it was only common courtesy in anyone else who knew of it to keep his knowledge to himself. So Mr. Charrington is renting the room to Winston and Julia, and he knows what's going on, and he's okay with it because he says it's private. He even, seeming almost to fade out of existence as he did so, added that there were 2 entries to the house, one of them through the backyard, which gave on an alley. Under the window somebody was singing. Winston peeped out, secure in the protection of the muslin curtain. The June sun was still high in the sky, and in the sun-filled court below, a monstrous woman, solid as a Norman pillar, with brawny red forearms and a sacking apron strapped about her middle, was stumping to and fro between a washtub and a clothesline, pegging out a series of square white things which Winston recognized as baby diapers. So she's obviously a prole, you can tell by the description. Whenever her mouth was not corked with clothes pegs, she was singing in a powerful contralto. This is what she's singing. I'm not going to sing. It was only an opeless fancy. It passed like an April day. That was my Irish accent. But a look on a word and dreams they stirred, they have stolen my heart away. The tune had been haunting London for weeks past, London as in the city. It was one of the countless similar songs published for the benefit of the proles by a subsection of the music department. The words of these songs were composed without any human intervention whatever on an instrument known as a versificator. But the woman sang so tunefully as to turn the dreadful rubbish into an almost pleasant sound. He could hear the woman singing, and the scrape of her shoes on the flagstones, and the cries of children in the street, and somewhere in the far distance a faint roar of traffic, and yet the room seemed curiously silent, thanks to the absence of a telescreen. Because remember, the proles don't have telescreens in their homes. Folly, 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 he thought again. It was inconceivable that they could frequent this place for more than a few weeks without being caught. But the temptation of having a hiding place that was truly their own, indoors and near at hand, had been too much for the both of them. For some time after their visit to the church belfry, it had been impossible to arrange meetings. Working hours had been drastically increased in anticipation of Hate Week. It was more than a month distant, but the enormous, complex preparations that it entailed were throwing extra work onto everybody. Finally, both of them managed to secure a free afternoon on the same day. They had agreed to go back to the clearing in the wood. That's where they first met, remember? On the evening beforehand, they met briefly in the street. As usual, Winston hardly looked at Julia as they drifted toward one another in the crowd, but from the short glance he gave her, it seemed to him that she was paler than usual. "It's all off," she murmured as soon as she judged it safe to speak. "Tomorrow, I mean." "What?" "Tomorrow afternoon I can't come." "Why not?" "Oh, the usual reason. It started early this time." For a moment he was violently angry, because he does that. He's very violent. During the month that he had known her, the nature of his desire for her had changed. At the beginning there had been little true sensuality in it. Their first lovemaking had been simply an act of will. But after the second time it was different. The smell of her hair, the taste of her mouth, the feeling of her skin seemed to have got inside of him, or into the air all around him. She had become a physical necessity, something that he had not only wanted, but felt that he had a right to. When he said, "There's a red flag." When she said that she could not come, he had the feeling that she was cheating on him. But just at this moment, the crowd pressed them together and their hands accidentally met. She gave the tips of his fingers a quick squeeze that seemed to invite not desire, but affection. It struck him that when one lived with a woman, this particular disappointment must be a normal, recurring event, and a deep tenderness, such as he had not felt for her before, suddenly took hold of him. He wished that they were a married couple of 10 years standing. He wished he were walking through the streets with her just as they were doing now, but openly and without fear, talking of trivialities and buying odds and ends for the household. He wished above all that they had some place where they could be alone together without feeling the obligation to make love every time they met. It was not actually at that moment, but at some time on the following day, that the idea of renting Mr. Charrington's room had occurred to him. When he suggested it to Julia, she had agreed with unexpected readiness. Both of them knew that it was lunacy. It was as though they were intentionally stepping nearer to their graves. As he sat waiting on the edge of the bed, okay, so everything he just said was he was remembering. It was a memory. Now he's back in real time, and he's sitting on the bed up in Mr. Charrington's apartment that he's rented for he and Julia, and he's waiting for Julia to get there. He thought again of the cellars of the Ministry of Love. It was curious how that predestined horror moved in and out of one's consciousness. There it lay, fixed in future time. There it lay, fixed in future time, preceding death as surely as 99 precedes 100. One could not avoid it, but one could perhaps postpone it. And yet, instead, every now and again, by a conscious, willful act, one chose to shorten the interval before it happened. At this moment, there was a quick step on the stairs. Julia burst into the room. She was carrying a tool bag, of course, brown canvas, such as he had sometimes seen her carrying to and fro at the ministry. He started forward to take her in his arms, but she disengaged herself rather hurriedly, partly because she was still holding the tool bag. "Half a second," she said. "Just let me show you what I've brought. Did you bring some of that filthy Victory coffee? I thought you would. You can chuck it away again because we shan't be needing it. Look here." She fell on her knees, threw open the bag, and tumbled out some spanners and a screwdriver that filled the top part of it. Underneath was a number of neat paper packets. The first packet that she passed to Winston had a strange and yet vaguely familiar feeling. It was filled with some kind of heavy, sand-like stuff, which yielded wherever you touched it. "It isn't sugar," he said. "Real sugar. Not saccharine sugar. And here's a loaf of bread, proper white bread, not our bloody stuff, and a little pot of jam." Now, remember, they're British. Every time she says bloody, that's not what she means. And a little pot of jam. "And here's a tin of milk. But look, this is the one I'm really proud of. I had to wrap a bit of sacking around it because..." But she did not need to tell him why she had wrapped it up. The smell was already filling the room. A rich, hot smell which seemed like an emanation from his early childhood, but which one did occasionally meet with even now, blowing down a passageway before a door slammed or diffusing itself mysteriously in a crowded street, sniffed for an instant and then lost again. "It's coffee," he murmured. "Real coffee. I would die if I couldn't have real coffee. It's inter-party coffee. There's a whole kilo here," she said. "How did you manage to get a hold of all these things?" "It's all inter-party stuff. There's nothing those swine don't have. Nothing. But of course waiters and servants and people pinch things, and look, I got a little packet of tea as well." Winston had squatted down beside her. He tore open a corner of the packet. "It's real tea, not blackberry leaves. There's been a lot of tea about lately. They've captured India or something," she said vaguely. "But listen, dear, I want you to turn your back on me for 3 minutes. Go and sit on the other side of the bed. Don't go too near the window, and don't turn round till I tell you." Winston gazed abstractedly through the muslin curtain. Down in the yard, the red-armed woman was still marching to and fro between the washtub and the line. She took 2 more pegs out of her mouth and sang with deep feeling. "They say that time heals all things. They say you can always forget. But the smiles and the tears across the years, they twist my heartstrings yet." That's the song she was singing. She knew the whole driveling song by heart, it seemed. Her voice floated upward with the sweet summer air, very tuneful, charged with sort of a happy melancholy. One had the feeling that she would have been perfectly content if the June evening had been endless and the supply of clothes inexhaustible. To remain there for 1,000 years, pegging out diapers and singing rubbish. It struck him as a curious fact that he had never heard a member of the party singing alone and spontaneously. So it's kind of like the bird scene where the bird is singing for nobody, and Winston is just really moved and emotional over it because it's so beautiful. So it's one of those moments, we've all had them, and we all still have them, where everything is just really peaceful and quiet, and we're just kind of sitting in that moment thinking, wow, this is really nice. So she's hanging out laundry, and it's a really sunny, pretty day, and she's just singing, and she's obviously a prole, and he's just noticing that she's just really happy singing and hanging laundry, and it looks like she could be happy hanging up thousands of pieces of laundry for the rest of her life. So he remembered he never sees party members singing and spontaneously. It would even have seemed slightly unorthodox, a dangerous eccentricity like talking to oneself. Perhaps it was only when people were somewhere near the starvation level that they had anything to sing about. "You can turn round now," said Julia. He turned round and for a second almost failed to recognize her. What he had actually expected was to see her naked, but she was not naked. The transformation that had happened was much more surprising than that. She had painted her face. She must have slipped into some shop in the proletarian quarters and bought herself a complete set of makeup materials. Her lips were deeply reddened, her cheeks rouged, which is an old way of saying that she put blush on them. This hair is driving me crazy. Okay. Her cheeks rouged, her nose powdered. There was even a touch of something under the eyes to make them brighter. It was not very skillfully done, but Winston's standards in such matters were not high. He had never before seen or imagined a woman of the party with cosmetics on her face. The improvement in her appearance was startling. With just a few dabs of color in the right places, she had become not only very much prettier, but, above all, far more feminine. Her short hair and boyish overalls merely added to the effect. As he took her in his arms, a wave of synthetic violets flooded his nostrils. He remembered the half-darkness of a basement kitchen and a woman's cavernous mouth. It was the very same scent that she had used, but at the moment it did not seem to matter. "Scent, too," he said. "Yes, dear, scent, too. And do you know what I'm going to do next? I'm going to get a hold of a real woman's frock from somewhere and wear it instead of these bloody trousers. I'll wear silk stockings and high-heeled shoes. In this room, I'm going to be a woman, not a party comrade." They flung their clothes off and climbed into the huge mahogany bed. It was the first time that he had stripped himself naked in her presence. Until now he had been too much ashamed of his pale and meager body, with the varicose veins standing out on his calves and the discolored patch over his ankle. There were no sheets, but the blanket they lay on was threadbare and smooth, and the size and springiness of the bed astonished them both. "It's sure to be full of bed bugs, but who cares?" said Julia. "One never saw a double bed nowadays, except in the homes of the proles." Winston had occasionally slept in one in his boyhood. Julia had never been in one before, so far as she could remember. Okay, and I need to point this out because for some reason it's a big deal. So you had a test question on this way back when, and it was about Winston's varicose vein. So I looked it up because I didn't know the answer either, and I think most of you missed it. Anyway, evidently, scholarly journals write about the symbolism in the varicose vein, because you should have noticed by now that the writer, Orwell, or Blair, mentions it all the time. Winston's varicose veins, his varicose veins. And that's just the little vein that pops up in legs and arms and such. And unfortunately, it usually comes with aging. So get ready. Anyway, it evidently represents symbolically Winston's need for true human interaction and not to be a part of this world and the party, and he gets nervous and anxious whenever he's getting ready to have a real interaction, a real human moment, and his varicose vein starts itching. So evidently scholars think that Orwell used the varicose vein to represent humanness and the feeling of being normal and natural. So there you go. If you're on Jeopardy ever, then you know the answer to that. So they're laying in bed up in the Charrington's apartment. And they're talking about they're sleeping in a full size or a double. They're the same thing, bed. And they've neither one really have much memory of having that size of a bed. Presently they fell asleep for a little while. When Winston woke up, the hands of the clock had crept round to nearly 9. He did not stir because Julia was sleeping with her head in the crook of his arm. Most of her makeup had transferred itself to his own face or the bolster, but a light stain of rouge still brought out the beauty of her cheekbone. A yellow ray from the sinking sun fell across the foot of the bed and lighted up the fireplace, where the water in the pan was boiling fast. Down in the yard the woman had stopped singing, but the faint shouts of children floated in from the street. He wondered vaguely whether, in the abolished past, it had been a normal experience to lie in bed like this, in the cool of summer evening. A man and a woman with no clothes on, making love when they chose, talking of what they chose, not feeling any compulsion to get up, simply lying there and listening to the peaceful sounds outside. Surely there could never have been a time when that seemed ordinary. Julia woke up, rubbed her eyes, and raised herself on her elbow to look at the oil stove. "Half that water's boiled away," she said. "I'll get up and make some coffee in another moment. We've got an hour. What time do they cut the lights off at your flats?" 23:30. It's 23 at the hostel. But you have to get in earlier than that because... Hi, get out, you filthy brute. She suddenly twisted herself over in the bed, seized a shoe from the floor, and sent it hurtling into the corner with a boyish jerk of an arm, exactly as he had seen her fling the dictionary at Goldstein that morning during the 2 minutes hate. What was it? He said in surprise. A rat. I saw him stick his beastly nose out of the wainscoting. There's a hole down there. I gave him a good fright anyway. Rats, murmured Winston, in this room. They're all over the place, said Julia indifferently as she lay down again. We've even got them in the kitchen at the hostel. Some parts of London are swarming with them. Did you know they attack children? Yes, they do. In some of these streets, a woman daren't leave a baby alone for 2 minutes. It's the great, huge brown ones that do it. And the nasty thing is that the brutes always... Don't go on, said Winston with his eyes tightly shut. Dearest, you've gone quite pale. What's the matter? Do they make you feel sick? Of all horrors in the world, a rat. Okay, so by now you should be thinking, oh yeah, he hates rats because I showed you that clip of that little torture scene with the rats. So he hates rats. She pressed herself against him and wound her limbs around him as though to reassure him with the warmth of her body. He did not reopen his eyes immediately. For several moments he had the feeling of being back in a nightmare which had recurred from time to time throughout his life. It was always very much the same. He was standing in front of a wall of darkness, and on the other side of it there was something unendurable, something too dreadful to be faced. In the dream, his deepest feeling was always one of deception, because he did in fact know what was behind the wall of darkness. Okay, he's just dreaming. He's just remembering. In the dream, with a deadly effort, like wrenching a piece out of his own brain, he would even have dragged the thing into the open. He always woke up without discovering what it was, but somehow it was connected with what Julia had been saying when he cut her short. I'm sorry, he said. It's nothing. I don't like rats, that's all. Don't worry, dear. We're not going to have filthy brutes in here. I'll stuff the hole with a bit of sacking before we go, and next time we come here I'll bring some plaster and bung it up properly. Already the black instant of panic was half forgotten. Feeling slightly ashamed of himself, he sat up against the bedhead. Julia got out of bed, pulled on her overalls, and made the coffee. The smell that rose from the saucepan was so powerful and exciting that they shut the window lest anyone outside should notice it and become inquisitive. What was even better than the taste of the coffee was the silky texture given to it by the sugar, a thing Winston had almost forgotten after years of saccharin. With one hand in her pocket and a piece of bread and jam in the other, Julia wandered about the room, glancing indifferently at the bookcase, pointing out the best way of repairing the Gaelic table, plumping herself down in the ragged armchair to see if it was comfortable, and examining the absurd 12-hour clock with a sort of tolerant amusement. She brought the glass paperweight over to the bed to have a look at it in better light. He took it out of her hand, fascinated as always by the soft, rain-watery appearance of the glass. What is it, do you think? Said Julia. I don't think it's anything. I don't think it was ever put to any use. That's what I like about it. It's a little chunk of history that they've forgotten to alter. It's a message from 100 years ago, if one knew how to read it. And that picture over there, she nodded at the engraving on the opposite wall, would that be 100 years old? More. 200, I dare say. One can't tell. It's impossible to discover the age of anything nowadays. She went over to look at it. Here's where the brute stuck his nose out, she said, kicking the wainscoting immediately below the picture. What is this place? I've seen it before somewhere. It's a church, or at least it used to be. St. Clement's Danes, its name was. The fragment of rhyme that Mr. Charrington had taught him came back into his head, and he added half nostalgically, Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's. To his astonishment, she capped the line, and that doesn't mean the same thing you guys say when you say that's cap. You owe me 3 farthings, the bells of St. Martin's. When will you pay me, say the bells of Old Bailey. I can't remember how it goes after that, but anyway, I remember it ends up, here comes a candle to the light you to bed. Here comes a chopper to chop off your head. That's nice. It was like the 2 halves of a countersign, but there must be another line after the bells of Old Bailey. Perhaps it could be dug out of Mr. Charrington's memory if he were suitably prompted. Who taught you that? He said. My grandfather. He used to say it to me when I was a little girl. He was vaporized when I was 8. At any rate, he disappeared. I wonder what a lemon was, she added inconsequently. I've seen oranges. They're kind of a round yellow fruit with a thick skin. I can remember lemons, said Winston. They were quite common in the 50s. They were so sour that you set your teeth on edge even to smell them. I bet that picture's got bugs behind it, said Julia. I'll take it down and give it a good cleaning someday. I suppose it's almost time we were leaving. I must start washing this paint off. What a bore. I'll get the lipstick off your face afterwards. Winston did not get up for a few minutes more. The room was darkening. He turned over toward the light and lay gazing into the glass paperweight. The inexhaustibly interesting thing was not the fragment of coral, but the interior of the glass itself. He's staring at this piece of whatever, like a shell, coral, that's probably was used as a paperweight, and he's just staring at it. He's just really enamored by it. There was a depth of it, and yet it was almost as transparent as air. It was as though the surface of the glass had been the arch of the sky, enclosing a tiny world with its atmosphere complete. He had the feeling that he could get inside it, and that, in fact, he was inside it, along with the mahogany bed and the Gaelic table and the clock and the steel engraving and the paperweight itself. The paperweight was the room he was in, and the coral was Julia's life and his own, fixed in a sort of eternity at the heart of the crystal. Okay, so that was part 2, chapter 4. I'm going to close out this video, so if you need to take a break or something, you don't have to watch 2 chapters. So I'll do another video next for chapter 5, part 2, chapter 5, if I can figure out how to stop this.